just discovered what might be the best budget track saw you've ever seen once we tweak it to make it the best. Now, this could compete with some of the top tier brands that you see in front of you, including Makita, Festool, and even the Milwaukee. Those are tall statements. Let's find out. First off, this video is not sponsored. I purchased this saw at full price with my own money. If you'd like to check out this saw or anything else I show today, I'll link those in the description and the pinned comment to help you find them easier. Let's go. All right, out of the box, this thing was well packaged. Kinda. It was well packaged in as much as there was 2 different boxes. It's like Vivor Inception there. But once I got it out of the box, it was just kind of laying in there. I couldn't get it to plunge straight down, but there was this metal piece sticking in there. And I don't know if this was on purpose or if it fell out of something and got stuck. We'll find out, I guess. I didn't see this in the listing. It was probably there. I probably missed it. But I was extremely surprised to see this. What this is for is you can slide this in to the side of your track saw, snug it down, and that's just a quick rip so that if you're just making 6-inch or 4-inch or whatever strips, you can batch those out really quickly. I was quite surprised to see that because I've never seen another track saw include these. Even though the Makita has a spot for one that you can buy separately, it didn't come with it, even at that price. And at this price, for $100, it's pretty good. Or at least I'm glad they put it in there. We'll see how it works. Now, obviously this Vivor is not a Festool or a Makita track saw. However, for $100, plus whatever a track costs for a PowerTech or a Wind track, one of the more budget option tracks, can it compete with these two? That's kind of what I want to know because these are very expensive tools. But this, at only about $100, give or take, at the time of this filming, and it's corded, so you don't have to get another battery platform. We're going to see how this stacks up against these later in the video. But first, let's talk about the features and what I think about the build quality. Straight out of the box, this feels really nice. Like the handles have a really nice textured grip to them. It doesn't feel cheap at all. And that was very surprising to me because I thought it was going to feel like the Wind, not maybe the Triton, because the Triton was a little bit better than the Wind, but I thought it was going to be on that Wind level. Like it just kind of a plasticky, cheap feel. Not at all. And the base, I thought would probably be plastic. It's some type of maybe aluminum or composite style material. Overall, the plunge mechanism feels really nice. We don't have a riving knife here, which is not a deal breaker because the Makita doesn't have one either. One thing that just caught my eye as soon as I got out of the box was this. The depth setting is a push button style, slide up and down, and you get an on track and off track depth setting. This is in metric, but typically it's not going to matter on a track saw. You're just going to set the depth. But I do absolutely love that one push slide. Now this is a little bit stiffer or harder to manipulate versus say the Festool or the Milwaukee or even the Rigid, but overall it works really well. I'm glad to see that. And it just feels really nice. I'm shocked by how nice this feels. Now, whether it performs as good, we'll see. As far as that bevel feature goes, it's much like all the rest of them. Now these are a little bit plasticky versus say Milwaukee, Festool, those things, but you got to trade this off somewhere because it's only $100. But they work nice and everything slides smoothly. Not a huge fan of the fatter style pointers there. I do prefer those that are more pinpoint like the Milwaukee, Makita, some of the other ones. It's just easier to read. This isn't the smoothest bevel action that I've found, so it's actually a little bit harder to get to that 45. Well, I guess I am at 45, and I'm hitting a limit there. So there we go. So we turn this switch to go all the way up to 47. That's what I was feeling. I thought it was sticking, but it wasn't. It's made to be that way. So it stops right at 45, a hard stop, and then of course a positive stop down at 0. We do have onboard tool storage right there in the handle, and that's for the arbor so we can change the blade. I'm glad to see this arbor lock, so it locks in place right there so you can change that blade. You don't have to hold it down. There was one track saw, I don't remember which one, that didn't. You had to hold it in place while he tried to do that. It was a pain. Now the only drawback to that arbor lock is the way it works. So you're going to push this button on the handle and it's going to go into that center groove, and that's where it's going to lock the arbor in there. So that's how you lock it. But if you don't press it all the way down, this button all the way down, and get this all the way above everything, it will not plunge correctly. In other words, it's going to get stuck in that middle groove, and that's where you're going to get that arbor lock. So you'll have to make sure that you're fully depressing that button so that you can go full depth of plunge, or whatever your depth you have it set at. It's not a big deal at all, just be aware of it. This also has a trigger lock, and it's that button that slides back and forth right across the top. If you press it and it's sticking all the way out like you see here, you can't actually turn the saw on. You have to press it in. I don't know why you would want that, but just unplug it if you're going to change the blade, but if you need it locked out, you can. Another feature that this saw has that some others don't is this. You'll see a 0 and a 45. What that is so you can use this as a standard circular saw. So you'll basically double up here. You get a track saw and a circular saw. 0 just is like if you're cutting 90 degrees, and then of course 45 is if you're cutting bevels. Now one good thing about this Vevor track saw is it'll work on standard track. In other words, Makita, Milwaukee, Festool, Win, PowerTech, whatever track you decide you want to buy, this should ride right on it. First power up, see what she sounds like. Sound like she got some power. Nice smooth engine, doesn't sound grindy. We'll see how she performs. One thing I always do is check for square. Take a good square, like our Faith Valley Tools Precision Square, and what you want to do is make sure that your blade is square to the base or shoe. If you see light, like right there, then you might want to adjust it. However, right now I'm just on the tooth of the blade, so make sure you're not sitting on the tooth. And if it's square, you should not see any light, just like that. This out of the box at 0, perfectly square, which is what we want to see. Just make sure you're not sitting on the tooth of the blade because they do stick out slightly. All right, first cut on plywood. First thing I noticed was the power is not there. Now I think it's probably the blade, because even at the end of the cut, you can start seeing a little bit of burning on that plywood, which we absolutely should not have, and even in the middle of the cut, I guess. You shouldn't have that much burning on plywood, and this is a 50-tooth blade, so it's a higher tooth count blade, should give us a nice clean cut, and it actually does give us a clean cut on the plywood, as you see here. But it did feel underpowered. Before we try the walnut, I wanted to try this rip guide, and it works extremely well. Like, both of these pieces are exactly the same thickness, which is exactly what you want. Now, there's going to be a little bit of learning curve here if you've never used one of these before, and I goofed up here on the end by putting the wrong pressure at the very end of the cut. And you can see I kind of dug in with the back side of that blade, but on the next cut we got it all squared away and everything worked out good. So this is a really good option to have. I'm glad they put that in there because it works well. Just make sure that the front and the back of this guide are the exact same measurement. You want to double check that before you get started. If not, it's going to throw your cuts off. Now, because of how much this struggled cutting that plywood with this blade, I have about 1% faith that it's actually going to fare any better in this walnut. So if not, we'll switch blades and see what happens. All right, as I suspected, it did not like that at all, and it just had a whole bunch of vibration too, like more than I've ever noticed in any other track saw. And you could even see the blade lines there where it's just not, the blade is not good. It's just a really, really cheap blade, and that's where they're saving their money. Let's throw a real blade on there, see what happens. All right, after I figured out I was trying to turn that bolt the wrong way, I got the Milwaukee blade on this track saw. Oh my goodness, night and day. Night and day difference, 0 vibration, very smooth cut, and I think the dust collection was actually even better. That blade that they send on this is absolute garbage. So if you buy this, go ahead and pick up another blade. I'll drop a link to the one that I recommend in the description. Depending on what you're cutting, if you're rip cutting or plywood cutting, I'll put those in there. But this blade, this Milwaukee blade, it is smooth. It makes a massive difference. We're talking about a huge upgrade on this saw just by replacing the blade. So look, this is the old blade, and this is where the new blade started, or the Milwaukee blade. And you can see that it doesn't have that burning in those striations in there like it does on that blade. I mean, it's a massive difference. And as far as power goes, I didn't feel like it lacked any power at all cutting through this 2-inch walnut. When I was cutting through the plywood, I felt like this was underpowered. So let's go back to the plywood and see how it performs now. That's just like a hot knife through butter. Man, the blade is the difference right there. It had 0 issues cutting through that, no bogging, no lagging, no struggling on the motor. It is a massive, massive difference on the blade. This upgrades this saw to the next level. And the cut quality, Like, it is a very, very good cut. Of course, the blade's gonna make all the difference there, but absolutely smooth cut on this plywood. This is just regular sanded plywood, birch plywood you buy it at your local home store, and both the bottom and the top side of the cut looks good, so we'll give this a thumbs up so far. Is it even fair to compare a $100 track saw to basically the three that are on the Mount Rushmore, as far as I'm concerned, of track saws? The Makita, the Festool, and the Milwaukee should be the far superior track saw here. And they may be in some ways, but as far as performance goes with this V4, cutting 2-inch thick walnut, cutting plywood with a good blade made a massive difference, and I'm quite impressed. Plenty of power. I thought it was going to be underpowered. Based on that first cut of plywood, I was like, man, I really wanted to like this thing at this price, but I can't because it's underpowered. And then I put a new blade on, and it totally changed my mind on what I thought about this saw. And there's a lot of features on this saw that are very similar to these top three, but some that will obviously separate them. Now, the first similarity is how you adjust the depth stop. Milwaukee, push button, moves easy, love it. Festool, push button, slides up and down, moves easy, I love it. This one is also a push button. Although it's a little harder to move, I still prefer this style over the single pole adjustment like the Makita has, although the Makita's works really good. They all adjust to the track very similarly with these little cam buttons or cam dials here that you just twist, and it takes the slack out of your track, or how the saw sits on the track so you get good accurate cuts. They all adjust very similarly. Now, the Milwaukee and the Makita both have anti-tip features if you're using their respective tracks. This does not have any anti-tip. It also doesn't have a riving knife, but the Makita doesn't either. However, the Milwaukee does, but the Festool has that anti-kickback. The bevel adjustment is where these three are going to shine. So if you're doing bevel cuts a lot, I would not recommend this, only because it's going to be very difficult to dial in exactly. And the reason I say that is, on my first cut through the walnut, it was slightly out of square. So I come back to the saw and checked, and the back of the blade was out of square while the front of the blade was in square. And the reason that is because there's a little bit of deflection from the front to the back. And so once I got that dialed in, I made another cut, and it was perfectly square in that 2-inch walnut. However, these, when you adjust the bevel, they just don't have that flex. And I think that's just kind of the budget option here. But if you're only cutting plywood, or your main purpose is to buy this to break down plywood, you're going to be perfectly happy with it with a good blade. The V4 also does not have variable speed, where all three of these do as well. So depending on the materials you're cutting, if you need variable speed, that's not in this machine. As far as dust collection goes, I don't think there's really a comparison here on dust collection. I think these top three have it beat on dust collection. I was not impressed with dust collection, although when you put a better blade on there, it was quite a bit better than that trashy stock blade. And of course, this is a corded saw, brushed motor. These are all cordless, brushless motors, if that matters to you. But that's really where the similarities end. Now, one of the things where these high-end track saws are going to way outdo this saw is just the overall build quality. Because they have to cut corners to get this price down, is what I would assume. So you're going to see that. Like, these knobs on there are really plasticky. Just the overall structure and build of this saw feels much different than when you get one of these other saws. And obviously it's a corded track saw, so you don't have to worry about a battery platform, but it is a brushed motor. So there's a few things, and they do send an extra set of brushes for it, so you can have those. But overall, the housing and the shoe or the base of the saw feels really nice, but I think everything else is where they're gonna cut those corners and save that money. Not that it's an overall bad thing if you're just looking for a track saw that's gonna break down plywood. This is probably the way to go. It's just a really good saw with a better blade, if you get a better blade. Now, if you do buy this, absolutely pick up a better blade, because this one is 100% garbage. They wasted metal and money putting it in the package. It's just brutal honesty there. This is the worst track saw blade that I've tested to date, and I've tested a bunch of track saws. This is not good. So just get a better blade, and it makes this saw much better. If they spent just a little bit more money on a better blade that comes with this, it would be absolutely the best budget track saw that you could buy. You can get this track saw for less than $100 at the time of this filming. And if you pick up 2 wind tracks at 55 inches each, in other words, 110 inches of track, enough to cut a full 8-foot sheet of plywood, plus you pick up another blade, that's right around a $200 price point for a track saw that's gonna basically help you break down plywood with ease and do it well. At this price point, at the time of this filming, less than $100, you get the edge guide, you get a really nice saw, powerful enough to cut through 2-inch thick walnut with a good blade. I think this is the new king of budget track saws. If you're thinking about this saw, you may want to check out that Win track saw or even an upgrade to the Makita track saw. Click on one of those videos, get you the big old virtual fist bump.